Lord, we know what we are, but not what we may be. Hamlet. I'm Dameion Brown. I survived 23 years in California state prisons. I'm now an artist in residence at Marin Shakespeare Company. My arrival in this position was an unlikely one. In 1992, I was sentenced to life in prison. My mother said to me, "Dameion, come home the son I raised." Prison life is monotonous, so I tried every self-help group available, thinking for change, critical thinking. I attended AA and NA, although I had never indulged in alcohol or drugs. I saw some men trying to better themselves while others used the opportunity to do less pro-social things. It was my opinion that most self-help groups were great at teaching to the test of what the Board of Parole hearings expected to hear. However, I did not see them creating substantial changes in behavior. Since I had never been a gang member, I strongly resisted joining one. This led to a series of unpleasant encounters, such as time spent in solitary confinement. But after several years, the gangs deemed me as unrecruitable due to my determination to follow my own path. I became known as Nation when an elder prisoner continuously referred to me as a nation unto myself. The nickname stuck for a couple of decades into self-refinement. I was going to the water fountain and I saw the flyer promoting a Shakespearean acting class. Well, Shakespeare's works were not a popular topic of discussion inside. And second, this class was obviously for the benefit of prisoners, and time had taught most of us that things solely for our benefit were never allowed to stay for long. So to avoid the common cycle of hope and despair, I adopted a defensive mechanism of thinking, if I never embrace it, they can never take it away. Resolute in my determination to not give the guards the pleasure of disappointing me, I rejected any curiosities about the class. But what about others who did want to attend? The paths one walks in prison are often trails laid by reputable people. If reputable names aren't on the list, reputable people are reluctant to sign. The list was blank for several days when I decided, as a somewhat reputable person, to sign. This led to other men signing. About a month later, those of us who signed received passes to attend. I ignored my pass, but a friend asked me if I was going. I said no. He's quite a comedic and persistent guy, so to get him off my nerves, I told him, I will walk with you to the class, but I'm not going in. We were late and the door was locked. This meant that we were out of bounds, therefore subject to disciplinary action. At that time, a guard saw us out of bounds and quickly moved in our direction. I was scheduled to go before the Board of Parole hearings soon. They had the power to set me free or keep me incarcerated, and an infraction would be a sure denial of parole. When the guard was about halfway to us, miraculously, the facilitator of the Shakespearean class opened the door. My friend jokingly asked me, "So are you not coming in?" When I entered the room, I was alarmed. There were members of various rival gangs in the room, and some men in that room had inflicted great bodily injury on others in that room in years past. I felt this would never succeed, as it was a very dangerous situation. And then there was Leslie, this small, happy white woman with a whistle and a panic button talking about how we were going to put on a Shakespearean performance, encouraging us to be silly, laugh, in other words, be vulnerable. At one point, she asked us to make bird sounds. Now imagine asking a room full of gangsters to do that. Well, I didn't have much to lose as the other guys, as I was not a gang member. So I made the bird sound. Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. Measure for measure. Everyone laughed at me. But something happened in that moment. Looking around the circle, the men saw the light of their enemies' eyes laughing with them. And at that point, a human connection was made. You can tell when it happened because they immediately stopped laughing and looked away. But it was the first chink in the armor. As I was leaving class, I heard men saying, "I'm not going back in there," because they had felt something they hadn't felt in a long time, and it was uncomfortable. They had experienced the vulnerability of displaying happiness in the presence of those considered enemies. This act went against the purpose of a carefully constructed mask forged over time as a survival mechanism. But after a week of prison monotony, the need to escape that dismal existence brought us back. Leslie had us do more exercises that made us laugh, express big emotions. And then she had us take different partners, which meant that now rivals were expected to work together. As for the play we performed, a clever choice was made. Macbeth. Every man in that room found his way into prison because of some vice found in the words of that play. And few things open hearts and minds more than being able to see oneself in the footprints of another man's path. After we read the story, such questions were asked. What themes in this play resonates with your life? Have you experienced similar challenges? And these men, most of whom would never open themselves up to a prison psychiatrist, started to reflect, and perhaps for the first time in some, and they started to chime out, I can relate to the betrayal. My girlfriend said if I didn't do something, I was weak. I was greedy. I was hungry. And we started to see in these men the vulnerability that they had spent decades trying to protect. Later, a pact was made. What happens in Shakespeare stays in Shakespeare. Now, this was a very dangerous agreement to make, as individual gang members cannot make secret pacts with rival gangs. It could easily be a death sentence. But we had seen too much of one another's true selves to, with conviction, hold up the facade of believing, I hate you. You are my enemy. Then it got more complicated. The date of performance was quickly approaching, and we knew that we needed more than the 2.5 hours a week to rehearse. So collectively, we decided to go outside on the yard and rehearse, but all would be able to see. The only catch was everyone had to attend. No one could stay in the buildings and sit it out. The first to be alarmed were the guards. They came over and they searched us. After a little while longer, they searched us again. When they were confident that we had no weapons, they called for a little backup, stood against the walls, and waited to see what would happen. Then it was the gangs. They circled the yard with shark-like intention. The first faction to approach was sent by a well-established gang leader, known for his boldness and brutality in years past. The henchmen approached the actor that was a member of their gang, and they asked him, "What are you doing?" Before he could respond, the entire ensemble of actors stood beside him and said, "We are rehearsing for our Shakespearean play." This is a very tense moment. Those men knew the potential violence of the men they were accosting. Many of them had perhaps been recruited and trained by the same men. The actors were ready to fight. I often think of this moment as the silver lining around the dark cloud of violence. These men had found something so profound and so exciting and so hopeful that they were willing, if needs be, to resort to violence to make possible their pursuit of a more pro-social existence. And those who challenged them knew this as well. Remarkably, the gang members withdrew and we resumed our rehearsal. But that evening, those men knew they could nor would never return to their former gang lifestyles. And I could easily sense the excitement and anxiety that accompanies one who begins a new life-altering journey. There is a time in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Julius Caesar. The night of our performance, about 150 of our fellow inmates were among those in attendance. Some had sworn they'd heckle us, but when the play started, they were transported into our Shakespearean world and lost sight of the men they thought they knew. When we bowed, there was a standing ovation. During the Q&A, a member of the audience stood. It was the same gang leader who had initially sent the henchmen to accost us. He was crying. He said, "I can't believe you guys pulled that off." This is possibly one of the best days I ever spent in prison. A few months later, I paroled. And as some men do, I came back inside to give a talk to help encourage some of the men who had been left behind. When I did, all ethnicities were present. I had never seen this before. Usually when a black man paroles and comes back in, the audience is top heavy with black men, a white man, white men, etc. I asked a friend why was all ethnicities in attendance, and he said to me, "Nation, it's been this way ever since that Shakespeare program came." When I first left prison, my first job was as a high-risk case manager at the Sheriff's Department. I told my young clients there were two things I wanted them to be aware of. One, I am not an officer. Two, everything I do on your behalf will serve to help keep you alive and to help keep you free. I'm now a full-time actor and teaching artist, sharing Shakespeare and life lessons to both marginalized and affluent youth. Some of the same transformations that I witnessed amongst adults in institutions with this program, I'm witnessing amongst the youth in their institutions. I see the boost in self-esteem that comes when you give young people the freedom to explore options without ridiculing them or telling them that they're wrong. I see this growth and confidence give them buy-in to enter more positive programming. I've watched them spend less and less time with the negative influences that had shaped them in exchange for the more positive influences that are now reshaping them. I watched their very vocabulary expand as I relate to them the words of my mother, who advised me to be able to speak and be understood, whether your audience is in the White House or a crack house. So much of my mother's wisdom guides me in serving the youth. I was ushered off to prison with her command echoing in my soul. "Dameion, come home the son I raised." The pursuit of that command guided me through my darkest days in prison and now served to guide me in helping others. Finally, I am certain that I am the son my mother raised. As I utilize her wisdom, coupled with the relevant works of Shakespeare, I am seeing young lives change for the better. I believe in the power of Shakespeare to change lives. I hope you do too.